So for this week on CyberSchool, we're actually going to talk about the physical installation of intercoms. As we get into the winter, we're in the midst of it now, and it's been quite a bit wetter in quite a few areas of the country, and also quite a bit colder, lots of snow. One of the issues that we get quite often at this time of year is issues with intercoms, specifically usually around installation, where unfortunately with the IP65 rating of our intercoms, that usually prevents water from getting in through the front faceplate, but it prevents anything from coming in and also prevents anything from coming out. So I couldn't tell you how many times where we have customers complain about their intercoms not working anymore, and we ask them to dismount the intercom, and they take out a screw, and a whole bunch of water comes out of the screw hole because the intercom gang box is full of water. And that's a common installation error that we get. And I figured today we could actually go over the process of picking an install location, how to prep the area for installation, and the best practices that you can utilize as you're going through that process to prevent any kinds of issues like this occurring. So that way you don't have to RMA the unit, because installation errors like that are not covered by warranty. So, if you can go through the process of preventing that, that's the best thing that we can do. And hopefully that this video will help provide some of these examples and processes that you can follow as you're installing your new intercom. So when you're installing the intercom the right way, there's a couple different points that you want to think about and kind of gates or parts that you can achieve as you're going through the process. Of course, first, when you're thinking about installing an intercom, you got to figure out where you're going to install it, whether it's going to be by a door or by a gate or what have you. Then you got to mount the actual gang box and pick a location to actually mount that gang box. Is it going to be, say, on the side of a cinder block wall? Will it be on, a stuccoed wall, or, will it have some kind of a surface to it? You got to think about all these things as you're going to be installing the gang box in a particular location, because of the texture of the wall that can lead to or potentially prevent, with more of a smooth style wall, more water ingress from the sides of the intercom. Then, of course, you got to pull the cables through and get all that mounted properly. And there's some tips that we can recommend in terms of the length that you pull through when you're doing that part. And then finally, you actually got to install the actual intercom into the gang box, and the different ways that you can secure it and just seal the actual interior of the gang box, and finally just mounting the unit and making it all complete and pretty and ready to go. So first and foremost, when you're getting ready to install an intercom, you got to pick the location for it. More often than not, when you're dealing with a product like this, it's going to be close to an entranceway, because the common use case for this is, somebody that, say doesn't have a key to the building is coming up and presses the button and talks to somebody, whether it's, a visitor, a potential new employee or a new hire, or just your friendly neighborhood UPS guy. So intercoms are very more often than not installed by the entranceway to a building, but sometimes they're also installed outside of a gate, where it might be, say, a secure parking lot or a secure goods area where you might not let the general public or any vehicle have access to. So there's two different common areas that you can wind up using an intercom. So when you're going to be mounting it by a door, you want to, of course, get close proximity to the door that you're going to be able to control with the intercom. There's a specific length of wiring that you can have back to the actual door strike that's actually controlling the door, as well as just the proximity and the ease in, actually routing a cable, because you've got to plug this thing into the network to be able to utilize the intercom. And that's all stuff to consider. If the outside of the building is a big cinder block wall, that might be a bit of a challenge to go and actually route cables through in that instance. So you might think of, say, mounting the intercom to the wall, and then running a conduit underneath it using the bottom conduit hole of the gang box to actually go and route the cables through there. It's a lot of stuff to consider as you're picking a location for an intercom, and not all, locations are the same. Some are potentially better than others, but you really want to have it in close proximity to the door that it's actually going to be controlling. And when you're dealing with a gate, of course, it's common knowledge, it's, common sense when you're thinking about it, but you want to think about any swing capability of the gate that it's going to be controlling. You wouldn't potentially want to install the intercom and not think about how the gate opens towards the intercom and it hits the gooseneck that it's installed on. So there's just a lot of things to consider when you're going and picking the actual location for one of these. And furthermore, if you're dealing with a gooseneck style, you want to mount it in such a way that, it's not a hazard that somebody could be, drive up and hit it when you're actually installing it. You almost want to install it behind a curb, kind of like, the, say, intercom box that you would utilize, at, say, a drive through at a food location, where it's typically mounted behind a curb. So that way, it's not an obstruction to anybody that's driving through, whether they're driving, a small little sedan or a big box truck. You want to make sure that, there's proper clearance for them to get by and not run into the intercom. So once you've got your intercom location figured out, you want to go through and mount it. One of the biggest and most important things that you can think about when you're mounting the intercom is how high you want it. And it really needs to be in an appropriate height. There are specific ADA requirements in terms of intercom height, so that might be something to consider. That way you keep your intercom at the appropriate level for ADA compliance. But you also want to just ensure, say the average height for, your regular employees. And you might want to consider different things, or, say if it's going to be a drive up location, you might potentially want a higher intercom on a longer or taller gooseneck. If you're getting a lot of truck traffic through there, typically, semis or box trucks are going to sit higher than, your fancy sedan. So it's a lot of stuff to consider when you're going and picking the actual height of the location. But you also want to pick a nice surface that you can go and actually mount the intercom to. Again, if you're dealing with, say, a stuccoed wall versus a cinder block wall, they're going to have a different surface texture, and one can lead to more potential water ingress or water actually coming down and getting in through the back of the gang box. So it's a lot of stuff to consider, as well as when you're dealing with a gooseneck, you typically want a nice cement pad to go and install the gooseneck on. So that way the actual pedestal that the intercom is on has a nice stable base and will be there for years, just like your intercom. So it's a lot of stuff to consider as you're going through and mounting the actual intercom itself. Then you want to pull all the cables through after you've got your gang box mounted in the correct location and get the cables into the actual box, because that's the important bit. It's all well and good if you've got the gang box mounted on the wall, but if you don't have any cables pulled through to actually utilize the equipment, you've just got essentially a paperweight installed on the wall. So you want to be able to route the cables and pull the cables through properly. Sometimes you're just dealing with an Ethernet cable if you're not using the intercom for access control, or if you're using it with an accessory like our networked dual door strike relay that doesn't need a physical connection to the intercom, you're just going to be pulling that data cable through. But in some instances, you're also going to have to pull through wires that are going to connect the intercom to the door strike of the gate controller that's actually going to be controlling the entrance way that the intercom is connected to. When you're doing that, of course, you want to make sure that the system is not powered so you don't, potentially shock yourself. And in all instances of pulling that kind of cable, CyberData does recommend having the product installed by a certified electrician. So that way it's all done up to code and you don't potentially hurt yourself during the process. And of course, as you're going through and pulling the cable through, you want to definitely go and route it through the appropriate hole. I've seen plenty of installations where they use the actual mounting bolt holes on the back of the gang box to route the cables through, when there's a big old half-inch conduit hole on either the back or the bottom of the gang box. Route the cables through where you're supposed to. Just because there's a hole there that it can kind of fit through doesn't mean that you should route the cables through there. Of course, it's your hardware. Do with what as you please, but we put that big conduit hole in there to make it really easy to route the cables through. And finally, you don't want to pull just enough length to be able to pull it in and have no extra room to pull the intercom out. You want to leave an extra length or an extra loop of cable inside the gang box itself. So for any reason, hopefully you won't have to, but if for any reason you need to remove the intercom from the gang box, you can just undo the screws and pull the unit out with having to tug on any of the cables, which could put stress on the device's circuit board or whatever those cables are connected to. So it's always a really good idea to pull some extra length into the gang box, so that way there's room if for any reason you need to pull the intercom back out of its gang box. Then finally, we get to one of the fun parts of it and where a lot of issues can come in when you're dealing with one of our intercoms. And that's specifically, of course, the device is IP65 rated when it's installed properly. And just because you've got the intercom mounted nice and flush up against a wall doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be protected from water ingress. And this image that I have here is actually one of the intercoms that we have installed here at CyberData. And as you can tell from the way that we installed it in some of these arrow points here, you can tell that this thing is actually installed really nicely and really cleanly. The actual surface of the wall itself is going to be a standard cinder block wall. So you're working with a pretty good surface in terms of sealant and prevention of water ingress because there's not that much texture to a cinder block when you compare it to something like a stuccoed wall. But as you can notice here on the two horizontal mounting holes that we have here, as noted with my mouse here, you can see that we've got kind of this black texture behind it. And it's actually a nice little rubber gasket that's in between the actual cinder block wall and the back of the gang box itself. And the other two holes up here on top, the two vertical holes, are gone through and basically poked through that rubber gasket and sealed with both a washer and a nice nut that are tightened all the way in there. When we went through the installation process, we're fairly happy with this, but you could also go the extra mile and just add some silicone sealant over both of those two bolt holes just to make sure that it's nice and well secured. But we're very comfortable with the installation there with just the rubber gasket that's going to be preventing any water ingress that's dripping down the side of the cinder block wall and going in between the gang box and the cinder block itself. But with that nice rubber seal and the rubber gasket that we have in there, there's no potential for issue in any water ingress. And a lot of the times that's where customers will leave it because, hey, we've got it sealed to the outside world and they don't do anything about this big conduit hole right here in the middle. And I couldn't tell you how many more times than not that nice cold conduit tube that's running the actual cable through goes and collects some humidity in there. And when it gets cold at night, the humidity condenses on the side of the tube and runs straight down into the intercom. And slowly this thing will start to pool with water. And eventually it'll get to about just above that bottom screw there. And that's where a lot of the power components are for the intercom, and it shorts out the intercom and kills the intercom. So one of the most important things you can do as you're going through and installing one of these intercoms is just not only seal the four mounting holes that are there in that diamond pattern on the back of the gang box, but also seal that center conduit hole with just a little bit of caulking as you can see there, just so that way the only thing that is coming out into the gang box is the cable, and it's basically sealed from the front gaskets that's on the front faceplate of the intercom, and the actual exterior of the gang box is all sealed. And when they're done like this, these intercoms can last for decades. Of course, some of the longest standing intercoms that we have are located out here at the Reno Tahoe Municipal International Airport, and they've been in service since 2008. Very awesome functional intercoms that are still working, and when they're installed correctly, these things can last for a really, really long time. And I expect to see those things there for the foreseeable future. But as you're going through and dealing with this process, these are a lot of the pain points that customers can run into and sometimes can be neglected to be serviced during the installation process. And because of that, that can lead to a damaged intercom, which may or may not be in warranty. And that's going to be up to the kind of installation process or any errors that might have occurred during that process. So then you go through and you mount the actual intercom itself. We've got the gang box all properly installed. Your cables are pulled. Now we got to go through and mount the intercom. So of course you're going to want to connect any accessory style wires to the actual screw down terminal. The common ones that are used are of course the two wires that'll go into our relay connections or potentially the sensor input to make sure that a door is closed. And of course you got to plug the intercom in via Ethernet and then actually kind of wiggle the intercom board into the gang box itself. It can be a close fit sometimes, and sometimes you have to angle it in there, but it's pretty easy to get in there. And then you have to pick the appropriate screws for the location and where it's going to be installed. Any of our intercom products come with both a regular Phillips head style screw or a Torque security bit, which is a really good option for a deterrent if this is going to be installed somewhere out in the wild where, potential public people could have access to it. It's always good as a deterrent to go and use the Torque security bits whenever possible. They're not at all, a proper theft removal or theft prevention style tool, but it's more of a deterrent that you can utilize to prevent anybody from going and stealing the thing. Of course, with a flat blade screwdriver, you can get in there pretty easily and work those Torque security bits out, or you can go to any hardware store across the continental US and purchase a Turk security bit for less than $5 and be able to remove one of these intercoms very, very easily. It's more of a deterrent than any kind of a protection, but it's always a great option because it's a deterrent. So then finally, as you're going through, here's kind of a summary of some of the best practices when you're installing an intercom. Always try to be sure that your install location and you know beforehand is going to have a good capability for one, routing cable and actually securing and sealing the intercom to the actual location where you're going to be mounting that. That's honestly a lot of the hard work is picking where you're going to put the intercom. It doesn't seem like it's going to be hard work, but that can really take up a lot of time. It can be a lot of pain points as you're going through and picking that particular location. And depending on the location that you choose to install the intercom, think about different ways that you can actually go and seal the gang box to its actual location. You know, a easy rubber gasket is something easy to work with. You can pick that up at your local big box hardware store and you can just get a nice sheet of rubber to go and install it on, or just a simple bead of caulk around the entire exterior of the gang box on the mounted surface, and the interior holes make it a really good way to install it. It's kind of up to you, but do take caution and do definitely try to really install and protect that investment. Intercoms are expensive and you want to be able to maintain that investment in your new infrastructure. And of course, one of the biggest things I really can't tell you, we preach this and the intercoms come in with damage all the time. One of the biggest things that you can do is not only just seal the actual mounting holes for the intercom, but that conduit hole. That is one of the biggest places for water ingress and can cause a huge potential for issue, even if you think that you installed it properly. And a lot of customers do that and will, potentially argue with us sometimes that it's installed properly, where there's a giant open conduit hole in there. That can lead to a lot of water ingress, and it's very common to do that. And then finally, just use the correct screws to deter theft whenever possible. Those Torque security bits are included and are a really good option to just kind of physically secure your investment after you go and get it all mounted properly in place.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.